Hey everyone, I am very excited today to be presenting my newest article in our ongoing series. This is going to be part 6. It's called Maitreya, the Buddha to Come, and subtitled Buddhism's Prophecy of the Coming Messiah. And this is an article I've been working on for a couple months now, compiling the material for it. And it is focused around unfolding the larger spiritual cosmology is the way I call it, but the larger emanationist doctrine of spiritual cosmology that Buddhism teaches in its religious philosophy. So this is Buddhism's version of the Mount Olympus hierarchy of gods that we see in Greece. This Olympian mountain is described differently in Buddhism, and the gods are described differently, but it's the same basic principles that are being referred to. It's just formatted in a different language, and in a language I think that is easier for the modern student to understand, I think, than the Western path, because the Western path has a lot of blinds and a lot of kind of cryptic symbolism that's meant to divert. That's part of the esoteric tradition, is that to really get the keys to the Western path, you have to kind of go within an order who will teach you how to unravel its symbolism, like a society or a fraternity or something. But in the East, I think it's more understandable and it's a little bit more transparent, the underlying spiritual ideas. So and this is a topic that we'll be going more into, what's special about Mahayana Buddhism and Eastern philosophy in general compared to the West. It's a topic that I think is important to understand because, we need to master the Western approach, but I think the keys to, or the foundation to get towards that mastery should come from the East. Because like I said, it's a little bit more of a transparent doctrine. And I'm very grateful that I was introduced to philosophy first through Taoism when I was a teenager, because that was the system that still influenced me the most in terms of its fundamental ideas, and that gave me the foundation of just basic principles to be able to build off of as I went forward into more complex work and into studying Manly Hall's work. So we're going to be studying Mahayana Buddhism as a case study of esoteric philosophy. But if you can understand this system, by analogy, you can understand the other great systems of world philosophy, Plato, the Orphic teachings, the, Hermeticism, the Kabbalah. And actually, I often reference the Kabbalah's Tree of Life diagram when putting this together, this long essay that I'm going to be sharing today. Because I found it was useful to use that diagram or that mandala to plot out some of the points that I'm going to be talking about today in terms of Buddhism's spiritual cosmology. Because ultimately, it's one teaching, so all the doctrines should work with each other's symbolism if you can have the key to be able to make that translation. So, yeah, I'm going to be doing this, probably breaking this up into 2 podcast episodes. The article itself is broken up into 3 parts. And I did that just because the Word document's like 60 pages almost. I mean, this is a really comprehensive, or no, I guess it's 45. But this is a really comprehensive investigation. And for those who are just listening on the podcast, if you watch the video version or if you go to the article, you'll be able to see some visuals and a couple tables and charts I put together. Well, not charts, but a couple, diagrams of how different principles that we'll be talking about relate to each other. And I think that's going to be useful. And also have some artwork that depicts some of these entities, and I'll be referencing that as we go on, but you'll be able to see those pictures if you look at the article or go to the YouTube. And on the YouTube, the way I do these now is I feature the article. I kind of go over the article, as you know, in the podcast, but I will, on the video version, I'll have the article itself scroll down as I'm reading it so you can follow along. So that could be useful to potential students. And so without further ado, I want to jump off and get into the introduction to this article and then we'll be going right in. There's 13 overall sections across all 3 parts, and let's get into it. So once again, the title of this is Maitreya, the Buddha to Come, Buddhism's Prophecy of the Coming Messiah. And this is an important, just given the title, this is like a centerpiece of this whole book that I'm writing, this whole series that we've been doing. And a centerpiece of the whole esoteric doctrine is this idea of the Messiah, what that means in philosophy, and we should, or how we should think about what that means for our future, and what does it actually mean, the coming of a Messiah, in terms of a future incarnation. Are we talking about one divine being, or are we talking about something that's more encompassing, perhaps? So I'm going to leave that a little bit murky for now, because I'm really not going to explicitly talk about Maitreya until the very last section, 13. Although all the points, I do talk about it a little bit ahead of it, but all the points are important to understanding that final chapter, that final section on Maitreya, because without the whole doctrine of spiritual cosmology, you just can't make sense of it. So let's get into it. Part 1. This is my introduction. In this article, we will be taking on a sizable task to lay out Mahayana Buddhism's core doctrine of spiritual cosmology. Meaning, we are going to look at its teachings concerning the origin of the universe, the emergence of spiritual powers and beings within the universe, and the story of how these powers work together to fashion the solar system, the earth, and the various kingdoms of life evolving here, humanity included. The primary focus of this article is to investigate the Mahayana school's teachings on how the spiritual hierarchy of the universe emerges out of and unfolds within the supreme consciousness of Adi Buddha, the one God. So let me just make a point. I'm going to be referencing a lot of names here, because this whole thing is organizing principles that are personified in terms of names. And if we can understand these principles, we'll understand how the cosmology unfolds. But you do have to understand that there are certain principles and names that you're going to have to learn, and a pattern among them that you're going to have to learn. So that's the whole point of this emanationist doctrine, is to teach this pattern. The system of religious philosophy is learning this pattern. So the pattern begins with a oneness or an allness, and in Mahayana Buddhism, that allness, that oneness, this is before allness, this is just the one God, the one like absolute being, one absolute consciousness. It's called Adi Buddha. And so this one is the host to all further creation. So basically we have Adi Buddha, means first Buddha. So this is the one God. And then within Adi Buddha emerge infinite Buddhas. So that's how it works. And each Buddha is like a universe. So that's how you can basically imagine it, is that each Buddha is like a self, a great self, and then the Adi Buddha is the one consciousness within which all selves are born and maintained and dissolved, ultimately in a cycle. So that's the basic pattern. So Adi Buddha is the first principle. At its root, the universe is born from a simple process of unity moving into diversity. In the earliest stages of this process, a hierarchy of spiritual beings emerge out of the one life, Adi Buddha, which again means first Buddha. These spiritual beings become the creators and overseers of the lower worlds of creation. As we will see, mankind is destined to play a special role in the planet's development, and as a result, we hold a special bond of relationship to this spiritual overgovernment, or hierarchy with a capital H, as Manly Hall terms it. This hierarchy is working literally always behind the scenes, meaning they're actually existent and manifesting their influence from within the higher realms of the Earth's metaphysical atmosphere. And their purpose is to evolve man in the direction of fulfilling its noble destiny, or a greater destiny. So mankind is meant to achieve a destiny, and we are not left to our own devices to fulfill this. We're actually being led from within in like a silent way to the attainment of this. And our task is to learn to hear this voice of the silence, quote unquote. And that's a phrase that we'll be referencing again. In this essay's extensive exploration of Mahayana Buddhism's doctrine of religious philosophy, 3 central aims are intended. First, we're seeking to build an outline of the Mahayana system's teachings about the nature of God, the reasons for the emergence of creation within God, and the relationship between God, nature, and man. In esoteric philosophy, God is defined in a dynamic and complex way. Understanding God as a dynamic monotheistic concept requires delving into a complex spiritual cosmogony comprised of angels, archangels, Buddhas, and bodhisattvas. And basically, angels and archangels is like the Western version of Buddha and bodhisattva. Not exactly, but it's basically that. Those are the elements in which the hierarchies are comprised in the East and West. And then humanity is the entity that is rising up to attempt to embody these greater spiritual archetypes that the angels and archangels represent. So the spiritual hierarchy exists within God and serves his divine plan as agents of his consciousness. It is our purpose on earth to learn the organizational structure of this hierarchy and imitate its design here on earth so that we may form ourselves into a microcosm of it, like a miniature design. We are seeking to imitate its archetype. Doing so will lead mankind into a new golden age. This is therefore the path we must learn and follow. So that's the first aim. Second aim. Our second aim in this work is to gain knowledge and insight about the esoteric anatomy of human life and its various spiritual, psychological, and material dimensions. By investigating the archetypal design of the spiritual hierarchy of the cosmos, we're seeking to understand the destiny of mankind and to develop a map that will guide us to eventually achieve this ultimate state of completion. The idea here is that in its ideal form, human civilization will be patterned according to an ideal or archetype already established for it in the heavenly or spiritual dimension of reality. Our task is to discover this archetype and bring it into realization here on earth as an objective state of reality. And in so doing, we will create the new Atlantis long pursued by the Arya. And remember, the Arya is the cycle that we've been tracking. The cycle of the current age, the fifth age of man. The third aim of this work is to investigate Mahayana Buddhism's teachings about the heart doctrine, which represents the core doctrine of spiritual teachings and practices developed and prescribed by the Mahayana Buddhists for the advancement of human evolution. Part of this doctrine concerns the mysteries of the Bodhisattva, and part concerns the mastery of yoga and meditation, and then another part concerns the prophecy of a coming Messiah, a great teacher whose incarnation will herald the salvation of the world. We live in an age of tremendous ignorance and suffering, and Mahayana Buddhism, like Christianity and other religious philosophies, to emerge out of the ancient mysteries, reveal a messianic doctrine of a Messiah to come, a human Buddha that is awaiting incarnation. In this article, we're going to investigate how this idea fits into the larger spiritual cosmology of the Mahayana doctrine and consider what it means for the immediate future of mankind. With these three aims in mind, let's begin our investigation of Mahayana Buddhism's religious philosophy by considering the first principles that it uses to define and explain the existence of God and the creation and evolution of the universe within God's being or consciousness. So is what we're going to be jumping into here. And then the very first section is called Mahayana Buddhism's Doctrine of the Four Worlds. And so we're going to be talking about essentially the hierarchy of four planes of existence in which the earth is embedded as the fourth and lowest. So we're going to be examining the three higher worlds and considering how they fit into this larger theme of a spiritual hierarchy emerging or emanating out of Adi Buddha, the one God. So we're going to examine the process by which this happens according to Mahayana Buddhism. So that's the next section. So part one, Mahayana Buddhism's Doctrine of the Four Worlds. The spiritual cosmology of Mahayana Buddhism is based off an emanationist pattern of philosophical reasoning. This is a dynamic it shares with its sister systems of philosophies, the ones who have emerged alongside Buddhism as products of a larger cycle of the Arya, the plan for world reformation that we've been tracking in our ongoing series. So by now you should know what I mean by the cycle of the Arya. All the great philosophical systems of world history share in common a core framework of esoteric symbolism and reasoning. This is because all are derived from a common parent source. Each clothes the inner teachings of this source system in different language and symbols, but at their core, Buddhism, Platonism, Pythagoreanism, Kabbalism, Hermeticism, Taoism, mystic Christianity, and mystic Islam all teach the same core doctrine of fundamental truths. While all share this single parent source in common, Mahayana Buddhism's version of the Aryan wisdom teachings is particularly notable for its simplicity, emphasis on compassion, and inspiring humanistic idealism. Of all the philosophical schools that have arisen since the original Aryan revelations of long ago, the Mahayana doctrine is notable in that its line of descent is said to be closest in tone to that which was once taught by the original caste of Indian Brahmins, who were the first outsiders raised up by the Aryan adepts to become the keepers of their wisdom tradition. By examining Mahayana Buddhism's emanationist doctrine concerning the universe's birth and evolution within God, or Adi Buddha as they call it, we are seeking to gain a clearer understanding of the nature of God and mankind's relationship to it. In the emanationist philosophy of Mahayana Buddhism, God is called Adi Buddha and exists in a sublime state of eternal unity. So remember, in this article, we're going to be dealing with a lot of terms and relating them to each other. So Adi Buddha is the first term. Adi is ADI dash Buddha, and Adi means first. So first Buddha, the one, and in Platonic philosophy, this is the one above all other ones, the first and only one, the parent of all number. Within this unity, a great cycle takes place where periodically a hierarchy of spiritual beings or Buddhas will emerge within Adi Buddha to become the creators of universes. So Adi Buddha Adi Buddha is the universe in the sense that it is the one, but within Adi Buddha emerge Buddhas, an untold infinite number, unlimited number of Buddhas, which each exist as outward expressions of this one Adi Buddha. But for us, Adi Buddha is the galaxy. The galaxy is the being within which we are within its space. We are within its consciousness. So that is the Buddha, within this Adi Buddha. Now, our galaxy may be within a yet larger Adi Buddha, which is a yet larger Adi Buddha, etc. But ultimately, the idea is there's an ultimate one Adi Buddha. And that is the one that's the parent to all others. So we exist somewhere along the line, but this pattern within Adi Buddha, in the creation of individual Buddhas, is the same pattern unfolding again and again. So it's a cycle of existence that emerges. So Adi Buddha awakens for one great cycle in which these Buddhas emerge, and then it closes that cycle and goes into a non-active state, or a yin state, and then that happens for a cycle, and then it comes back out for another active cycle, and this happens in eternity. So there's one ultimate truth that oscillates between these two states, it eternally oscillates between yin and yang, essentially. And so that's the fundamental dynamic. This hierarchy that emerges within Adi Buddha performs their creative acts for a cycle of activity, and then collectively gathers together and submerges back into the oneness from which they originated. Then the oneness rests in its oneness for a cycle before eventually again emerging back into an awakening state of creative activity, when once again a hierarchy of spiritual beings or Buddhas will emerge out of its womb in order to create and evolve universes. Or you could say galaxies and solar systems. These are all microcosms of the whole pattern. So you could say our immediate universe is the Earth, and then above that is the Sun, and then above that is the larger galactic structure that we'll be talking about that the Sun is embedded in, and then etc. goes upward up to the level of the galaxy, and then you could say the galaxy at that level it repeats again, and so this is how incredible the hierarchy is. It goes to unimaginable levels. but all of these levels exist within one ultimate state, which is the host of the whole thing, and that is Adi Buddha in the Mahayana system. Other systems call it something else, but this is Adi Buddha. And in the Jewish Kabbalah, it is Ein Sof, boundless life. And Ein is the passive state that Ein Sof submerges back into during its cycle of non-existence. And in the Mahayana system, this is called Adi Buddhi. So instead of Buddha, it's Buddhi with an I on the end instead of an A. And so that references the eternal state of non-existence that's also the difference between Brahma and Brahman in the Indian system. Brahman is this eternal, or you could say Atman is this eternal state of being, and then Brahma and Brahman are the two states of God that oscillate into and out of, like Brahman is one with Atman, and then Brahma exists in relation to Atman. I hope I'm not confusing you, but anyway, this is the correspondences that exist in these different cultures. So in the Mahayana systems, this is called Adi Buddha, and the passive state that emerges into is Adi Buddhi. So if Adi Buddha is the one, then Adi Buddhi is the zero. From Adi Buddha, the ultimate one life behind all universes, lesser Buddhas, each designed as a microcosm of Adi Buddha, emerge within the absolute space of Adi Buddha's consciousness. Adi Buddha is the one consciousness that all subsequent consciousnesses emerge from and draw their life from. It is the one self, the cosmic all. Adi Buddha is the supreme consciousness of the universe. Manly Hall describes it as, quote, consciousness in the eternal state of knowing without a knower. It is the eternal fact which remains unchanged whether it is known by anything or anyone. It is unchanging in its essential essence and ever-changing in its appearance and manifestation. The process of cosmic creation within Adi Buddha takes place as an act of divine meditation, implying that the universe exists as the deliberate creation of a single divine consciousness. This ensouled creation is created, maintained, and ultimately dissolved by the mind of this divine consciousness, who holds it within its womb during the entirety of its lifespan. So here I'm associating the mind with a type of maternal principle. You could also associate the yin or state of non-existence that Adi Buddha absorbs back into, the state of Adi Buddhi. You could also associate that with a feminine principle. So these would be two forms of the cosmic mother, you could say, two octaves of it. And there's further octaves below in which the mother becomes the goddess symbolically. But these are all representative of the yin or feminine principle in different levels of existence. So consciousness is the resource, and then within consciousness emerges the mind, which is the power that allows for creation, which is the activity. So creation exists as an ongoing activity by the mind of Adi Buddha as a type of meditation, and the ultimate cycle of existence, the active cycle of existence, the Brahma rather than Brahman, the Brahma kind of active state of existence is one that it takes place as one grand meditational cycle. The process of cosmic creation within Adi Buddha takes place as an act of divine meditation, as we were saying, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so now next paragraph. Adi Buddha as the one is eternal, but as eternity, it oscillates between two modes or qualities of existence, one active, one passive. This is something I mentioned earlier. Its active or yang mode is termed Adi Buddha, while its yin or inactive mode is termed Adi Buddhi. Adi Buddha and Adi Buddhi are two aspects of the same reality forever oscillating between each other. In this way, they relate like the yang and yin principles of Taoism. Adi Buddha as yang is forever moving in a cycle that oscillates between opening and closing its consciousness to creative activity. When its consciousness is closed to creation, Adi Buddha retires into the state of Adi Buddhi, where it is in a yin or inactive state. This means it is undefined, it is unity without reference to anything else. When the One reopens its capacity to host diversity, it does so as Adi Buddha, the father-mother of infinite Buddhas who are born, evolve, and then ultimately are reabsorbed back into the absolute space of its infinite being. When consciousness reabsorbs itself back into the state of Adi Buddhi, a quote, cosmic night commences. But this cosmic night is not considered lacking or empty or incomplete in any way. Rather, this cosmic night is a state of total completeness, fulfillment, and non-action. Between the two states of existence, the state of Adi Buddhi is considered superior, implying that when Adi Buddha awakens out of its condition of cosmic rest, it does so by stepping down or lessening itself in an abstract spiritual sense. In terms of Brahmanic philosophy, the difference between Adi Buddhi and Adi Buddha is identical to the difference between Brahman and Brahma. Brahman is the ultimate reality, and the cyclic emergence and reemergence of Brahma within Brahman represents the beginning of a move within consciousness to limit and place boundaries upon its own inherent boundlessness for the sake of self-experience. On this abstract yet important point, Manly Hall writes, quote, "The manifested universe is part of the sleep of Brahma, so that when he goes to sleep, the objective world comes into existence, and when he awakens, it disappears. Instead of creation being the handiwork of his objectivity, it is the dream or sleep life of the power behind creation." He then continues, describing the cosmic creation process in meditational terms. By entering into the state of an internal awareness, Adi Buddha passes slowly, by the power of will and yoga, through a series of progressive states which are created by its own will and sustained by its own internal visualization. These states are the unfolding creation we believe we know. Adi Buddha, as it awakens from the cosmic night to begin a cycle of cosmic activity, does so by becoming what is sometimes termed a, quote, Buddha field. So Adi Buddha, in relation to all the Buddhas that exist in it, exists as this absolute field of consciousness. So it's sometimes called a Buddha field, within which Buddhas are born and evolve and grow. So each Buddha is carried within a greater womb, which is Adi Buddha, which is it's the father mother. It's both at once. And each of the Buddhas is a child of this father mother. When the God consciousness of Adi Buddha awakens, it does so by becoming what can perhaps be best described as, quote, a Buddha field, an infinite space filled with infinite life, light, wisdom, and love. In this all-encompassing field of oneness, Buddhas within Buddhas stretch to infinity, each growing and evolving its own light as a child of Adi Buddha, the All-Father, All-Mother. This hierarchy of Buddhas manifesting within Adi Buddha is patterned according to an archetypal design that the ancient Buddhists termed Miru, M-E-R-U. The invisible government is the hierarchy of spiritual entities, Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, etc., that exist together within the Buddha field of Adi Buddha. Plato famously defined the design of Miru as, quote, archetype, the archetype. And Manly P. Hall often calls it hierarchy with a capital H. Either way, the core idea being referenced is that there is one common spiritual design pattern that is stamped across the face of creation and is therefore present within every life form born within its womb. In modern astronomical terms, the evolving Buddhas within Adi Buddha's Buddha field are galaxies growing and expanding within the absolute field of universal space. By implication, our galaxy is our Buddha, or our Adi Buddha. It is the one great consciousness that gives birth to and nourishes all subsequent life forms that emerge to exist within its space. In this case, space means consciousness, with each solar system being the manifestation of an idea or thought of this supreme Buddha consciousness. Our world exists within this greater cosmic spiritual context. Typically, in esoteric philosophy, this doctrine of nesting spiritual realities is taught in terms of the four worlds, with our world existing within a yet greater solar world, which in turn exists within the life of a yet greater father star, which is in turn a child of the consciousness of the galaxy's central sun. From our perspective, then, the four worlds that together comprise our reality are: number one, the first world being that of the galaxy. This is the home to Adi Buddha, or the Adi Buddha of our world, of our system, which is the galaxy. The second world is that of the father star of our solar system. In a few of his rarer works, Hall states that this father star is the fixed star Vega of the constellation Lyra. And on this note, I want to thank Alan Harris of manlyphall.info for all the work he's done with his site and all the material of Manly Halls that he's uploaded. It's truly a priceless resource. I've thanked him, personally, and but anyway, he has on here posted a very rare lecture series by Manly Hall called Hierarchy, the Hierarchy, and you can download that on manlyphall.info, and that was a major source of mine in compiling this current article, this long 3-part series. So I just want to shout out Alan Harris for that. And let's just get back to it. So the second world is the world of the father star. The third world is that of the solar system, or the solar life. And then finally, the fourth world is that of the earth. So those are the four worlds. And human consciousness is extended between, I should say consciousness is extended between all four. And human consciousness extends between three, and has to transcend individuality or the principle of individualness. The self or sattva principle has to be completely universalized in order to contact the higher realms above the earth to increasing degrees of abstraction. So these are the increasing nirvana. These are levels of nirvana, parinirvana, and mahaparinirvana. Is the solar, the father star, and the galaxy. These four worlds are together held within an additional zero world, which is the Buddha field of Adi Buddha, the one that holds our galactic Buddha within its eternal womb alongside innumerable other Buddhas growing and evolving alongside it. So that's the end of section 1. Section 2 is called the Divine Trinity: Adi Buddha, Vajradhara, and Vajrasattva. And get used to those two latter names. I'm going to go over what those mean, but we're going to be using those a lot. So that's the next section. So section 2, the Divine Trinity: Adi Buddha, Vajradhara, and Vajrasattva. The root word Vajra is usually translated as like diamond-hearted or jeweled. So Vajradhara you'll usually see as sometimes seen translated as diamond jeweled thunderbolt, and Vajrasattva as the diamond heart. I think of it as the divine self, because sattva means self if you translate it. So Vajrasattva essentially means the divine self. So the divine self is born from Vajradhara, which we're going to see means the divine mind. And this takes place within Adi Buddha, which is the absolute consciousness, absolute space, which is the source of creation. As we just covered, the esoteric doctrine of Mahayana Buddhism teaches that creation emerges as a consequence of a series of mental contractions and unfoldments taking place within the consciousness of a supreme being called Adi Buddha. As the old saying goes, the universe is created by a process of will and yoga. This means it is created as a deliberate meditational act. So yoga is the direction of the will, is the science of mastering the cultivation and direction of the will. So by will in yoga, it's implying the masculine and feminine principles combining to form the perfect human. The sequence of stages that take place within Adi Buddha during this cosmic creation process establishes an archetype that is replicated within the creation of each subsequent life form that will later be born within its space. So what I mean by that is the initial process by which the first thing is created, the Vajrasattva, the divine self, by the process by which the divine self is created by Vajradhara, the divine mind, within Adi Buddha, the one consciousness, which is also absolute space, that this sequence of stages that creates this divine self establishes an archetype, and so that everything that happens within the divine self exists as a replication of this fundamental archetype. So this trinity of Adi Buddha, Vajradhara, and Vajrasattva establishes an archetype, a threefold pattern, and this pattern is going to be replicated henceforth in everything that exists. So everything from here on out is organized as a trinity. And that's why in philosophy, and if you follow my channel, you've heard me say this before, the method of the philosopher is to triangulate. So when you understand the pattern between these three principles, you'll be able to understand why the method of triangulation is the pattern of philosophy. And simply put, this is thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. So two polarities, and then the third principle, synthesizing. And these three principles act as one. So the three as one is what the Trinity establishes. And that's the archetype. This creative archetype is based on a pattern of three. From one root principle, which is consciousness, is manifest a trinity of three root principles. These three principles together exist as one. They are a three as one. Depending on one's perspective, these three principles can go by different names. The main point is that the pattern between the three stays the same. It works like an equation. Different variables can be put in, but the mathematical geometry of the equation stays constant. The three principles emerge together within consciousness and are ensouled by consciousness. Each represents a different principle or quality of consciousness in manifestation. None can exist by itself. Always, all three are present. So that's how the archetype works. This is the logic of the archetype. Before going into the Buddhist names for the archetypal trinity that emerges out of unity, I want to start by first discussing the underlying principles that these three Buddhist divinities personify. In this way, I want to offer the key to the equation before actually going into the details of how this equation is described and framed in the Mahayana system. In plain language, the three archetypal principles that emerge out of the archetypal unity of Adi Buddha are consciousness, mind, and self. So consciousness is Adi Buddha. So Adi Buddha is eternal reality, and within the Trinity, it remains as part of the Trinity as the apex position. So Adi Buddha becomes the apex of the Trinity, and then in the form of consciousness, which is its essential quality, and then the other two principles that emerge within consciousness are mind and then self. So first the mind and then the self. The self is born from the mind, or the interaction of mind and consciousness. From absolute undefined consciousness emerges the power of mind, which then acts upon the initial state of undefined consciousness in order to produce a self, which manifests as a consciousness. So before it was like all consciousness or undefined consciousness, and now we have consciousness defined in the form of a consciousness, an entity, a Buddha, a God. Mind is the intermediary that allows the eternally unbound and unlimited consciousness of Adi Buddha to become bound and limited into the experience of a self-consciousness or a self. Self is consciousness localized to a point. One of the old images of deity is the dot within the circle. Self is the dot, consciousness is the circumference, And the line that connects the two is the mind. And this dot and circles analogy is something Manly Hall references all the time, particularly in his book, Lectures on Ancient Philosophy. So the self is the dot, and we're going to be calling this the Vajrasattva. The line is the mind. We're going to be calling that Vajradhara, and consciousness is the all-encompassing space, or symbolically the circle, which is the Adi Buddha. So again, let's restate this Trinity in the language of Mahayana Buddhism. Consciousness in its supreme state as the one consciousness is termed Adi Buddha, which means first Buddha. Here we see the word Buddha means consciousness. In its supreme state, Buddha is unbound, unlimited, infinite, and eternal. From Adi Buddha emerges the power of mind, which in its most supreme condition is called Vajradhara. Mind is the agency that allows for creative activity to take place within consciousness. Adi Buddha remains forever infinite and eternal consciousness, with mind emerging within it as a creation-producing power. Mind oscillates between two states of existence, activity and passivity. When mind becomes latent within Adi Buddha is said to exist in a state of non-existence or non-expression, which in Buddhism is termed Adi Buddhi. The emergence of mind within consciousness marks the transition of Adi Buddhi into Adi Buddha. With this transition, consciousness opens itself up for a cycle of creative activity to take place within it. So, so this is kind of one of these subtle abstract points. So what is it? It's like the mystery of what is Adi Buddhi, because Adi Buddha actually never changes. It's mind that exists in and out of relation to Adi Buddha. So when mind doesn't exist or absolves into Adi Buddha is said to exist in the state of Adi Buddhi, but actually it's always the same. It's always Adi Buddhi, or you could say it's always Adi Buddha. It's just that or the mind declares these two polarities because the mind is the one that is polarized. So there's a subtle point here. The mind is actually involved with the mystery of matter and the mystery of the mother and the mystery of the number two. So these things are all related. But it's by means of this power, the power symbolized by the number two in the Pythagorean system, Vajradhara in the Mahayana system, it's this mystery, it's this mother that is the power of creation, the active power of creation. Adi Buddhi and Adi Buddha represent the yin and yang polarity of mind. Consciousness itself is not polarized, but in relation to mind, it appears in two states, Adi Buddhi and Adi Buddha. For mind, the supreme state of consciousness, Adi Buddhi, is one that represents for it a type of death in the form of absorption into its parent principle. And then when it reemerges during Adi Buddha, it does so by being symbolically reborn. So that's why mind is said to be the eternal penitent, as Manly Hall says. And the esoteric doctrine of the ancient Hindu Brahmins, this eternal oscillation of mind within consciousness is termed the inbreathing and outbreathing of Brahma. In astronomical terms, Adi Buddha is absolute space, which is an abstract concept. And Vajradhara is the emergence of mind within absolute space, which allows it to become a universe, or rather to become the host of universes. A garden in which infinite Buddhas are blossoming. Each galaxy is a Buddha. Each is therefore a self, a consciousness which exists as a localization of consciousness by mind. The Buddha of our galaxy is our Buddha. Its consciousness is the parent and host of all further consciousnesses that emerge within its space. It creates these lesser selves in the same way that it was created as a self. It draws from within itself the principle of mind, just like Adi Buddha does, its own Vajradhara, and has its resources localized to a point which becomes its manifest self, or its divine self. In Mahayana Buddhism, this manifest self is called Vajrasattva. The root word Vajra means divine, or more literally, diamond jeweled. Its presence in the words Vajradhara and Vajrasattva implies that these two terms are referencing the highest and most divine states that these two principles can exist in. The true qualities of cosmic consciousness, Adi Buddha, are undefinable, but through mind, Vajradhara, they are made definable in the form of self, Vajrasattva. In Manly Hall's words, the mind becomes the custodian of the original dimensionless structure. So the mind gives it dimension, and the thing that has dimension that is created, in which the quality of dimensionality is imparted, is the self. Mind is the mysterious power within consciousness by means of which the experience of self may be fashioned. When it is fashioned, consciousness remains without any of its unity being diminished or affected, as does mind. Self, therefore, exists always as the third person of a trinity, with mind being the second person and consciousness the first. Vajrasattva is a divine experience of self that Vajradhara fashions for Adi Buddha. So now I'm just using the Buddhist words. See if you can unravel that sentence. Vajrasattva is a divine experience of self that Vajradhara fashions within Adi Buddha. It always takes place as one of many, meaning there's always more than one Vajrasattva within Adi Buddha. Each Vajrasattva is a Buddha or galaxy within the background space of Adi Buddha, the universe, which hosts innumerable Buddhas within its womb. Manly Hall explores the relationship between consciousness and mind in his many writings. Here are a few notable quotes that summarize some of his views on the topic. Quote, "The mind arises as a self-apperceiving power. It is the self-knower, that which says, I know I exist and I am. Mind generates a unit of self-knowing, which creates its identity in relation to an encompassing field of not self, representing all the potentials within consciousness that are not actualized by the self-knowing unit." Again, these are all quotes of Manly Hall. "Therefore, instead of looking out into space and seeing eternal consciousness, Adi Buddha, self looks out into space and sees the not self. The self is now the point around which the entity cannot perceive. Through mind, Vajradhara, the universal and eternal knower, Adi Buddha, becomes the mortal self-knower, Vajrasattva. But in the process, it loses its power to know its unconditioned greater aspect. It has centralized its universal attributes and sacrificed universal consciousness for the emergence of an objective awareness of self-existence. Therefore, in symbolism, mind is the eternal mendicant, paying for the knowledge of its own existence by the loss of its participation in the universal existence. It pays for life by awareness of death." And Vajradhara is the principle that symbolizes this in Mahayana Buddhism. Vajradhara is not really a Buddha, but the power of mind within Buddha. Nevertheless, this power is the first Buddha or first logos that the Mahayana doctrine attempts to depict. In Buddhist art, Vajradhara is often depicted as the eternal meditator. As Manly Hall notes, Vajradhara being the eternal Buddha. So from our perspective, Vajradhara is the first manifested thing within Adi Buddha that we can point to. And so you don't see Adi Buddha necessarily depicted in art, but you'll see Vajradhara. So in Buddhist art, Vajradhara is often depicted as an eternal meditating Buddha. And he sits meditating in the midst of space, which is Adi Buddha. He's in the midst of space, his immense being faintly overshadowed amid the eternal sea of the infinite. In another passage, Manly Hall summarizes the circumstances around Vajradhara's emergence, I think quite beautifully. Quote, through an eternal motion, Adi Buddhi becomes Adi Buddha and reaches the emergence of creation. This being passes into internal contemplation and loses gradually, as by a sleep, the full awareness of itself, and envisions or causes to arise from its own meditations, which is Vajradhara, meditations implying mind, a series of shapes, likenesses, or shadows, which it then permits to become the custodians of its own consciousness. In this way, the creating power goes to sleep in its own consciousness, becoming immersed in it as Vajrasattva. So you can see how Vajrasattva, Vajradhara, and Adi Buddha are all related in that one quote. Vajrasattva, also called the diamond heart or divine self, is produced as the offspring of mind and consciousness. Or rather, mind acting upon consciousness gives birth to self and its two principal qualities of love and wisdom. So love and wisdom being the yin and yang principles. To summarize the process, consciousness, Adi Buddha, through mind, Vajradhara, focuses itself into a fertilized region, Vajrasattva. This creates around itself a region of relative absence, a void. Outside of the void is the boundary of the system, where self dissolves back into mind, which then dissolves back into Adi Buddha, which is the unbound oneness. The boundary is therefore threefold, representing the triune nature of deity. And this is the threefold boundary you see at the perimeter of the Ptolemaic system. So those three levels, and you also see it at the three levels of the Kabbalistic tree of life with Ein, Ein Sof, and Ein Sof Ar. It's referencing the same three trinity of divine principles. The fertilized center plus the void plus the boundary together form the three elements of the self, or Vajrasattva. These three elements are represented in the classic symbol for the deity, the dot in the circle. The self is the one consciousness, one mind, and one form, and is made from one substance. And there is one archetype designing the whole process. One framework of law that the Trinity is embodying in its manifestation. Archetype patterns creation simultaneously in terms of its space and time dimensions. Each are proceeding according to one numerical, mathematical, and geometric template. It also patterns creation within both its subjective and objective dimensions. The outer world of nature evolves according to the same set of rules and principles as our inner psychic life. Note the overall pattern. In relation to Vajrasattva, Adi Buddha is unmanifest, while in relation to Adi Buddha, Vajrasattva is manifest. This is a difference between God outside of creation and God within creation. The mind, meanwhile, is the feminine principle which manifests simultaneously as the mother and the goddess. The self, or son, is born from the mother and becomes creative through the goddess. It is then guided to completion by the same feminine principle and ultimately reabsorbs back into her after its evolution is complete, returning to the mother to await future rebirth, where it will then repeat the cycle once more on a higher plane of consciousness. In astronomical terms, we find that in relation to our world, Adi Buddha is the universe, Vajradhara is the galaxy, and the central galactic sun is Vajrasattva. The central galactic sun is the great white light. This light is the central flame from which all further flames are lit. While Adi Buddha represents the oneness of consciousness existing eternally in a state outside of diversity, Vajrasattva emerges as this oneness reborn as the all, the one overtop the many. Vajrasattva is the divine self as the one self over all other selves. Vajradhara, meanwhile, is the soul, mind, or bodhi, B-O-D-H-I, a Sanskrit word. The bodhi principle is the root word of Buddha. The bodhi principle that mediates between two realms, that which is eternally outside of space and time, Adi Buddha, and that which is born as the perfection of space and time, Vajrasattva. So Vajrasattva is the microcosm, Adi Buddha the macrocosm, and Vajradhara the intermediary. Vajrasattva exists as a concentrated embodiment of the archetype. It is born as a miniature version of the future state of perfection that the universe is destined to eventually evolve into becoming. So this is an interesting point. Now, Vajrasattva on a galactic scale, we're talking about the central sun. So the central sun is born as the seed archetype for the whole galaxy that is evolving into formation and has been since the beginning, and it currently still is, and we're part of that formation. But the central seed archetype is that Vajrasattva, that central sun, and that central sun contains the in a concentrated form the perfection that is intended for the whole, and then that the whole arises within the void or the space that exists between the Vajrasattva, the seed, and the shell, or the boundary, outside of which is Adi Buddha. That boundary and the center, there's a space in between, and that is the domain within which this outer body is gradually evolved and elevated into the image of this internal archetype, into forming that image. So the universe, or our galaxy, will be perfected at the end of its evolution by becoming, as a whole, the fullness of the archetype that already exists at the very beginning of the universe as the seed archetype for that universe. So that seed Buddha, the whole universe will become that an objective manifestation of that seed archetype at the fullness of its evolution. And if you frame this back in meditation terms, it makes sense, because if creation exists as a meditation, then the act would be to set out the plan for the meditation, which represents the seed archetype, and then the plan goes into actualization, which is the actual creation of the universe as a creative act made in the image of that archetype. So Vajrasattva exists as a concentrated embodiment of the archetype. It's a miniature version of the whole that will one day evolve into formation. This seed archetype extends its consciousness into the void around it and begins the process of projecting its own perfect image into this field of fertilized space activity. This it does through the utilization of 7 soul powers, or rays. These rays manifest in space as 7 dimensions of matter, and in time as the 7 ages or 7 cycles of creative activity. Each age manifests the predominant quality of one of the 7 rays, with each of the 7 subcycles within the age repeating the pattern. So each age has 7 subcycles. The space area within which these 7 rays are moving into creative activity is organized according to 7 domains, each embodying one of the 7 qualities of consciousness associated with the 7 rays. So by domains, I mean dimensions. In sum, the world is made from the alchemy of 7 rays being projected by Vajrasattva into the abstract void created by Vajradhara at the reawakening of Adi Buddha from Adi Buddhi. And if you followed me so far, you can disambiguate that sentence. The world is made from the alchemy of 7 rays being projected by Vajrasattva into the abstract void or matter created by Vajradhara, the polarity of Vajradhara, the either chaos polarity in Greek, or you could say wisdom love polarity, at the reawakening of Adi Buddha from Adi Buddhi. So the void is an aspect of the mind. It's created as a consequence of the creation of the self. You have to create a void, but the void becomes the area in which the creative activity takes place. It allows the concentrated seed to project. It gives it a dimension, or 7 dimensions, for the creative seed to project its 7 rays into, so that it may form the perfect image of itself at the fullness of the creative cycle. And with that, we're going to end the second section and pick up with the third, which is called the Celestial Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Referencing back now to a point mentioned earlier, Manly Paul has stated in a few of his more esoteric works that Vega is the father star of our solar system. It is the local Adi Buddha within which our solar system is born and contained. as its Vajrasattva. So our solar system is the Vajrasattva of Adi Buddha. The doctrine associated with Vega is part of the esoteric teachings of all ages and was not spoken of until only very recently. It is only in modern times that this type of information has become capable of being publicly revealed, with Manly P. Hall likely being one of the first esotericists to openly teach this aspect of the doctrine. And this he does in only a few of his select works, such as ones that aren't as well known, such as his 6-part lecture manuscript series titled The Hierarchy. I think I mentioned that earlier, but this was originally limited to only a press of 100. And I want to thank, again, Alan Harris for getting a copy of that and then putting that online, because it was an invaluable resource for me. I mean, essentially in that work, he talks about in like very comprehensive detail, the Mahayana system and how it works. And he does that in a number of it. It's not the only work of his that he does it, but he does it in a level of detail in that particular series that he doesn't do in any other series. So that was a great find. Continuing now. As a microcosm of our father star, our solar system follows the same creation sequence within itself as its father did in fashioning it. First, it manifests from within its nature a mind, which it then uses to manifest a self into which its consciousness can be focused. However, in this case, rather than manifest one vehicle or one sattva to express its consciousness through, it manifests 7. The 7 lights that emerge out of Vega are termed the 7 rays. They are the 7 colors that are divided from the pure white light through the prism of mind. Together, these 7 rays are the mind in manifestation. So the Vajradhara originally creates the Vajrasattva, and then the Vajrasattva recreates within itself a mind, but this mind takes the form of 7 rays. And these 7 rays externalize as 7 Vajrasattvas, which implies that our solar system is one of 7 systems that are united under Vega. The 7 lights that emerge out of Vega are termed the 7 rays. They are the 7 colors that are divided from the pure white light through the prism of mind. Together, these 7 rays are the mind in manifestation. In Buddhism, these 7 rays are given the name Dhyani Buddhas or celestial Buddhas. The word Dhyani in front of the word Buddha, Dhyani means meditation. So meditating Buddhas, or you could say the celestial Buddhas. By celestial, we're just implying above our solar system, but within the galaxy. As Manly Hall describes them, these 7 rays are the 7 rays of light that surround and adorn the head of Brahma, which is the Indian term for Adi Buddha, which again is Vega here. In Northern Buddhism, these ornaments are called the Dhyani Buddhas. These spirits before the throne are the revealers or agencies through which deity extends the domain of his consciousness. Hall continues, the universe is composed simply of thoughts and is dependent for its existence on the directionalization of the wills of the 7 Dhyani Buddhas. They are seated upon their lotus thrones where they remain forever in contemplation, deep in the eternal state of the principle which they personify. Their rays of thought meditation are reflected into every atom of space and establish the inevitability of the septenary law in nature. These 7 rays of pure thought, also called soul powers, are cast into the field of matter that surrounds the Vajrasattva, which in this case I'm calling Vega the Vajrasattva. So these 7 rays of pure thought, these 7 soul powers or extensions of consciousness, are cast into the field of matter that surrounds Vega. So that's where our solar system is born. Our solar system is born within this field of matter that has been fertilized by the consciousness of this great Buddha consciousness, Vega. So what happens in creation is that Vega, once it has been created by the central sun, it in turn becomes a creator, and it does so by basically following the same pattern that its father did, the central sun, which is that it casts its 7 rays, which are derived from the central 7 rays of the central sun, but it casts its own 7 rays that are filtered through its own sattva, its own self, its own state of understanding. It recasts the 7 rays within itself to form its own mini universe or microcosm, which is comprised of 7 sub solar systems that are together evolving within its space. So it's expressing itself through these 7 solar systems. And each solar system is comprised of all 7 rays, but each solar system will specialize itself according to one of those 7 rays. So the 7 rays become the seed archetypes for the generation of 7 solar systems. Together, these 7 systems absorb and manifest the light of these 7 rays to perfection, bringing the innate potentials within them into complete expression and fulfillment. Each solar system contains all 7 rays in it, but will prioritize one of the 7 as its primary quality or characteristic. In this way, each solar system works to manifest and complete the destiny of one of the 7 rays, thereby contributing to the greater evolution and growth of the father star. Our sun exists as one of these 7 solar systems of Vega. In the Mahayana system, the 7 rays are personified as the celestial Buddhas. Each is enthroned in the sun as a manifestation of one of the 7 qualities of its being. The sun, being a microcosm of Vega, manifests within itself the 7 rays of the 7 celestial Buddhas that have moved into it from Vega. So it reproduces the sun reproduces the 7 celestial Buddhas, i.e. the 7 rays, within itself in the form of 7 bodhisattvas. So keeping up with our language, we're calling them celestial bodhisattvas. So the outward extensions of the celestial Buddhas are the 7 celestial bodhisattvas, and these exist within the sun, and the 7 celestial Buddhas exist within Vega. The 7 celestial bodhisattvas are the outer faces of the 7 celestial Buddhas. They are the 7 rays made manifest in our solar system, with each of the 7 bodhisattvas serving as a particular ambassador for one of the celestial Buddhas. Bodhisattvas are divine beings with light bodies, quote unquote, implying their form is comprised of a subtle substance of solar matter that exists beyond the more dense matter of Earth. So it's a higher vibrational frequency. Each is born as a Vajrasattva of the solar deity and manifests in particular the attributes of one of the 7 rays of Vega. The consciousness of these bodhisattvas is directed into the earth to form the being of a human Buddha, called in Buddhism the Manushi Buddha, and in ancient Hindu teachings the Manu. So Manu, root word man, and then Manushi, root word Manu. So human, Manushi Buddha, human Buddha. The Manushi Buddha exists at the intersection point between the consciousness of the solar sphere and that of the earth sphere. He serves to focus the consciousness of the sun into the earth, directing it into the formation of Earth's 7 kingdoms of life. The Manushi Buddha is the archetype of life on Earth, with the 7 kingdoms of life on Earth being the 7 manifest aspects of this divine man's being. In this way, the Manushi Buddha is the Vajrasattva of Earth, with the 7 kingdoms of terrestrial life existing on Earth being the product of the 7 rays of soul power that the Manu makes manifest within it. So each bodhisattva is a sattva created within the sun, or it's a Vajrasattva, divine self within the sun. The Manushi Buddha is that divine self made manifest into the earth. So the 7 rays concentrate into one Buddha, which becomes a human Buddha. And this Buddha exists as the intersection between the earth sphere and the solar sphere. So remember, we have the 4 worlds. So the 4th and 3rd worlds, at the intersection of those, we have the Manushi Buddha, the human Buddha. And this human Buddha manifests 7 times, as we will see, to become the 7 Manus. 1 Manu for each age, or 1 human Buddha incarnates over each of the 7 ages, and in each age, a further aspect or a further ray of his soul power, as we've been calling it, is developed and released. So with each incarnation, he releases another one of his septenary powers. And so we're in the fifth age. So we're trying to release. So we've had 4 powers released, and we're trying to release the 5th, essentially. And that is the end of section 3. And then section 4 is the last section of part 1. And it's called the Manushi Buddha. The consciousness of the 7 celestial bodhisattvas together fashion the human Buddha, or Manushi Buddha. This Buddha resides within the solar sphere at the intersection point between the sun and earth, as we just described. The earth sphere is held within the developing life of the sun, evolving as the seed embryo of a future sun. The human Buddha, or divine man, is the Vajrasattva, or divine self, of the earth. He is fashioned by the regents of the sun, the 7 bodhisattvas, to become the seed archetype for 7 kingdoms of life that are manifesting on earth. This divine man, who is androgynous, not actually a male, exists at the apex of the planetary sphere at the point where it is first born out of the sun. So this is the Adam Kadma of the Jewish Kabbalists. The Manushi Buddha exists permanently at the intersection of the sun and the developing earth embryo. He manifests from within himself 7 terrestrial bodhisattvas, who together embody and make manifest these 7 rays within the earth, where they form the 7 kingdoms of evolving life developing here. So the terrestrial bodhisattvas bring the 7 rays to the lower kingdoms of life evolving within the earth sphere. And the Manushi Buddha remains forever or eternally in meditation throughout the cycle of the Earth's existence. He holds the framework of Earth's evolution within his consciousness. And this Manushi Buddha is a bodhisattva. It is a divine human, born as a child from the interaction of the sun and the earth. So the highest of the 7 kingdoms created on earth is occupied by the Manu, who is the creator of the lower 6, I should say. The second highest kingdom is that of the terrestrial bodhisattvas, who incarnate with the Manushi Buddha as manifestations of his 7 rays. So they're the outer faces of the 7 celestial bodhisattvas. The third highest is that of the adept. So the third kingdom is the adept. This is the Superman, quote unquote. The adept is, and so the terrestrial bodhisattvas are the demigods in this case. And then the Manushi Buddha is like the human god, the god man. The third highest kingdom is that of the adept. The adept is the human from the present life wave who has risen to embody the archetype first established by the Manushi Buddha and his 7 bodhisattvas. They are the custodians of the esoteric schools, having inherited this honor after having been initiated into adepthood by the bodhisattvas who first incarnated here. The fourth of these kingdoms is the unenlightened man, which is the majority of humanity at this stage of its evolution. And then below and within man exist the lower 3 kingdoms, the animal, the vegetal, and the mineral. As we can see from the above taxonomy of kingdoms, humanity exists in a complex, polarized state of existence with its consciousness extended across all 7 of the kingdoms. There is an inner spiritual core to the human, but there is also an outer physical aspect that is enmeshed in the illusion of separate existence. The inner core is personified by the upper 3 kingdoms and the lower physical aspect by the lower 3 kingdoms. Those human souls who have attained enlightenment in this round of evolution, which is a comparative few, form the Earth's 5th kingdom of nature, and you might call them the supermen, or people who have been raised to the state of bodhisattvahood for the current age. As far as the 5th age goes, we haven't done the complete cycle of all 7 ages of bodhisattvahood, but for the 5th age, there are individuals who have evolved to the state that we're trying to evolve to and already accomplished the fullness of perfection for the 5th age individual. They've realized the archetype of themselves, their own soul for the 5th age, and they become the 5th kingdom. They evolve above the rest of humanity to become the guiding like father figures, because they are above us in this taxonomy. And then above them is the bodhisattvas, and above them is the manu. So the manu is our interface with the solar life. And so then above the manu is the solar deity, and then above that is the father star Vega. So the solar deity and Vega don't have the sattva principle. So the manushi Buddha is the individual at the cusp, the last cusp of sattvahood, of selfhood. So together, unenlightened humanity forms the fourth kingdom of nature, and the three lower kingdoms, animal, vegetal, and mineral, exist below it. This descending hierarchy culminates in the atom, which is the nadir of nature's mineral kingdom. So the atom is the nadir of form. Now there are substructures to the atom, but the atom is the unit that, the smallest unit that, especially the hydrogen atom, the smallest unit that evidences the qualities of the higher forms of life above it. So it's the last level of wholeness that is comprised of parts. It's the last system, the smallest subsystem, because then below the level of atom, the parts don't exist as wholes comprised of parts anymore. They exist in a more abstract state. So they don't fulfill the full definition of a system as far as system science defines a system. The atom is the lowest level. So we say that the atom is the nadir of the mineral kingdom. The goal of human life is to integrate the 7 levels of human consciousness so that this consciousness becomes depolarized and becomes aware of the complete state of its own existence. This involves extending a bridge of consciousness from the spiritual kingdoms above to the terrestrial kingdoms below, or the 3 higher kingdoms to the 3 lower kingdoms. And man is that 4th kingdom, that intermediary between the two. So man looks down into his, the unredeemed man identifies with the lower kingdoms of himself, and then the higher man attempts to synthesize these lower aspects in order to identify and become the higher kingdom, the 5th kingdom. So the 4th is this middle ground. That's where the majority of humans reside. In relation to man, the 3 lower kingdoms of nature, animal, vegetal, and mineral, exist both internally and externally. On one hand, the 3 lower kingdoms exist below man as the 3 lower forms of life that we encounter in our environment. On the other hand, these 3 kingdoms not only exist out there, quote unquote, but also internally within the human being itself. Each human body, for example, has its animal, vegetal, and mineral components, such as the skeleton would be the mineral component, the vegetal would be the blood and the veins, and the animal part would be like the muscles. The 3 lower kingdoms of nature exist outside of the body of man as separate kingdoms of life that we can encounter in our environment. But they also exist within the body as an internal order of life that must be wisely governed by the human being who plays host to them. By contrast, the 3 higher kingdoms of life on earth exist above man, or you could say within, at a level that is beyond individual self-consciousness. So you say it's above, meaning above man's physical ego aware level of existence. These include the higher self, or adept self, which represents the perfected form of the 4th kingdom human, which I was just talking about as intermediary humans, where it has evolved upward to become part of the 5th kingdom. So at the 5th stage, or the 5th kingdom, 5th human, the demigod state of humanity, the kingdom that's above our 4th state, at this state, the consciousness of the person identifies primarily with the universal rather than with the individual. So that's the difference. The fundamental difference, the polarity is that we in the 4th identify with the individual self, where in the 5th they identify primarily with the universal self. So the 4th kingdom perfects itself in the 5th kingdom, and likewise 5th perfects itself in the 6th, and the 6th through the 7th. It is man's evolutionary mission to synthesize and incorporate these 3 lower elements of himself into his own consciousness, so that the consciousness of self will extend into all kingdoms of nature as they exist both within and without. In so doing, the human progresses themselves to evolve past the fourth kingdom up to the fifth. At the fifth stage, the human becomes the adept. Above the level of the adept are the terrestrial bodhisattvas, and above that is the manushi Buddha, or the Manu. So again, those are the sixth and then the seventh. Then above the Manu exists a whole spiritual hierarchy of solar and galactic life that culminates in Vega, the Adi Buddha of our system. Together, these elements all combine to form the invisible government or spiritual hierarchy of the earth. So when we say now the spiritual hierarchy, in terms of philosophy, we're talking about these 7 rays and these 3 principles of Adi Buddha, Vajradhara, and Vajrasattva. So the 3 and the 7 make 10. And these are the basic elements with which the universe is created. And this archetype expresses itself over and over again. And so repeatedly, consciousness is using mind to create a self, and this happens on numerous. This happens over and over again, but it's at each time it's stepped down into one layer of matter, or one level of expression into individuality further, and this whole thing culminates in the. On one hand, you could say the ultimate microcosm of this is mankind, with man existing, the consciousness of man extending across all 7 levels, and the goal of man's evolution being to integrate all 7 of these levels so that the microcosm can become, or so that the human can become a perfect representation of the seed archetype of humanity, which is the manushi Buddha. And so this manushi Buddha is the Vajrasattva, it's the divine self. That it's the self that's at the seat of the collective unconscious that Carl Jung talked about. And this divine self is the manushi Buddha. And then above this manushi Buddha is the 7 rays and this hierarchy of the solar life and the celestial life and then the galactic and then the universal. So it's unity within unity within unity, consciousness creating selves, expressing itself through mind, which becomes a septenary, and then that factors in, and the whole thing becomes this complex manifestation. But there's one archetypal pattern that underlies the whole thing. So that is my presentation for part 1 of this 3-part series, and that's the end of the article. And then we'll be picking back up with part 2 coming up next, and that's going to take things picking back up. Now remember, overall I said there's going to be 13 parts, so we'll be starting part 5 in part 2. So check back in. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you soon.